The broadcast of the regular meeting of the Audit Committee will now begin.
Good morning. Welcome to the regular meeting of our Audit Committee for August 24th, 2020. I am Lene Palmisano and I am the chair of this committee. As we begin, I will note for the record that this meeting has remote participation by members of the City Council, Park Board, and other commissioners as authorized under Minnesota Statute Section 13D.021 due to the declared local public health emergency. At this time, I will ask the clerk to call the roll so we can verify a quorum for this meeting.
Committee member Fletcher? Schrader?
Here.
Fisher? Committee member Fisher?
Somehow I got muted. Sorry, I'm here.
Oh, thank you. Usich?
Present.
Johnston? Chair Palmisano?
Present.
There are 4 members present.
Thank you. Let the record reflect we have a quorum. Before you is the agenda proposed for today's meeting. I'll ask the clerk to call the roll. Well, first, I guess we need a motion to adopt the agenda. Could I have that motion to adopt today's agenda as posted and in front of you today?
So moved.
Madam Chair.
Thank you. It's been moved by Commissioner Musich and seconded by Mr. Fisher. I'll ask the clerk to call the roll on Commissioner Musich's motion to adopt the agenda.
Committee member Fletcher? Schrader?
Aye.
Fisher?
Aye.
Musich?
Aye.
Johnston? Chair Palmisano?
Aye.
There are 4 ayes.
Thank you. So the agenda is before you. The second piece, the first item on the agenda would be to accept the minutes of the adjourned session of June 29th, 2020. Could I have that motion?
So moved, Madam Chair.
Mr. Fisher moves it.
Madam Chair, this is Heather. I'm sorry I didn't unmute fast enough for the roll call, so I can second that motion.
That's all right. Thank you. Thank you for joining us. And Ms. Johnston seconds that motion. I'll ask the clerk to call the roll on that motion to accept the minutes.
Committee member Fletcher? Schrader?
Aye.
Fisher?
Aye.
Musich?
Aye.
Johnston?
Aye.
Chair Palmisano?
Aye.
There are 5 ayes.
Thank you. Those meeting minutes are adopted. Next in front of us, we have a contract amendments audit. It's phase 2. It's the construction contracts audit report. I will offer to Interim Director Patrick to bring us through it and walk us through that. Mr. Patrick.
Certainly. Thanks, Chair Palmisano. If we could go to our PowerPoint here, I'm going to discuss the phase 2 construction contracts audit, specifically contract amendments. If we could go to the next slide. So the phase 1 of this project, specifically contracts, was presented at the December 9th, 2019 meeting and covered amendments for other types of contracts. So specifically in phase 2, we were reviewing construction contract amendments. This is important as those can be pretty large and considerable in every project. When a contract amendment is received, we want to make sure that we have appropriate controls in place to monitor those contract amendments. And this is also quite important during COVID times when other types of review may be abbreviated due to the need to construct and do projects at a faster rate. Having fewer people in the office, we thought it was very important to continue with this audit and keep it on our plan. We worked with our team over at Baker Tilly, specifically Tony Ullman and Kevin Morkel, who are nationally recognized construction contract auditors. So we had some of the best in the nation working on this project to verify the process that we use. We could move on to the next slide. So the audit objective specifically was to determine whether internal controls were adequate to ensure construction costs were adequately supported and contractually compliant, specifically these contract amendments. Move on to the next slide. So the scope specifically included construction contract policy and procedures, payment application testing, and change order testing. It looked at a broad sample, so 13 projects across 4 departments: Park and Rec, Finance, Property Services, Public Works, and the Convention Center. These are areas with significant construction contracts, and that's why they were selected. We'll move into the next slide. So the report identified 7 audit issues, 2 moderate and 5 low. There were 0 high-risk rated issues. Before I go into a description of the issues, I'd like to note that this is a very clean bill of health. Because there are no high-rated audit issues, the contractors did not see any evidence of price gouging or significant issues with construction contract amendments. And while there are 7 audit issues, it should be read that this program is working successfully. And despite these audit issues with no high-rated risk issues, this is a pretty good, clean bill of health. We can move on to the next slide. So I'm going to go through the specific results and happy to answer questions that I can, and those that I can't, I can direct them back to our consultants and get those questions followed up in the next meeting, but I'll try and address as many as I can. So Public Works, the auditors found no audit issues in Public Works. In the Convention Center, 3 issues were noted. The first, moderate. Contractors did not break out the cost of work on change orders so that city personnel could perform comprehensive analysis of the costs. So a specific breakout of each of the individual items on the change orders wasn't there. I would note that the auditees responded in management response to all of these audit issues and are working on remediation plans, accepted the results. So those are forthcoming in the coming year. 2, contract terms do not define the allowable markup on change order work. This was rated as low. You might read it and note that doesn't specifically get stated in contract terms, but specifically it appears that controls for change order review are currently in place and sufficient to prevent price gouging. It's recommended that markup be clearly defined to prevent contractual disagreements in the future. But while reviewing these change order documentation, there was no indication of any predatory pricing on change orders. So the reason it's low is specifically because there are other controls in place that are allowing for monitoring of contract terms. 3rd, project documents are not stored in a central and easily accessible location, potentially allowing decision making without reference to the contract documents. So again, this is rated low, but it's specifically in response to initial document requests. They weren't provided initially in the first round of document requests, but the terms, payment application processing and whatnot weren't provided in these initial base contract documents. However, the auditee was able to produce all of those in a subsequent round, and all of the appropriate documentation was provided. So storing them in a central location might make it faster to respond to those requests in the future, but all that documentation was there, and they'll be moved to a central and easily accessible location in the future. That's why it's a low rated risk issue. Move on to the next slide. For Finance and Property Services, there were 2 low-rated issues. So specific contracts did not define the allowable markup on change order work, and the department didn't require lien waivers for each application for payment. So again, these are low-risk rated issues. Specifically, the lien waivers issue, collection of those on throughout the project reduces the risk of liens being placed on a property, but this is rated low because specifically they're not collected on a monthly basis, but final lien waivers are collected before the project completion and specifically before retainage is released. So the documents exist and they are being collected prior to release of the contract, so it is a low rated risk issue. They could be collected more frequently during the project, but they are collected at the end. Number 6, As a moderate issue, contractors did not provide adequate cost detail and change orders for the department to verify change order costs are reasonable and comply with contract terms. So again, a moderate risk-rated issue. There was no evidence of price gouging or fraud in this area, but the management response indicates that those contract change orders will be broken out in more detail in the future. And the department in this does not specifically require supporting documentation to validate payment application costs. Again, a low risk rated issue. There was no indication of problems happening in that area, but there are further techniques that the convention center specifically can use to validate payment application costs. So all in all, in a time, kind of a challenging time, to have a very good audit come back on how construction contract amendments are occurring, it is very reassuring. No indication of fraud or price gouging, and controls in place are functioning. Specifically, these 7 issues, they'll be remediated, and we will continue to follow up with the departments to make sure that takes place. I'm happy to answer any questions, but that is the substance of the report. So if you want to see detailed observations and management action plans, they're included in the attached audit reports attached to the agenda. And moderate audit issues generate open audit issues with timelines. We will validate these again and report back to the audit committee when they're remediated. You may see we're working out timelines with the auditees in the report, and hopefully we'll have another report back on completion dates at the next audit committee meeting.
That's great. Thank you. Does anybody have any questions or comments on this particular audit? I will call on Mr. Fisher.
Yes, thank you. With respect to the required lien waivers, you've indicated that it's rated low, Director Patrick, because final lien waivers are obtained. What type of risk do we run if we don't obtain these during the process, during the construction process? Is there a possibility of liens being imposed on an interim basis before the project is completed?
So the lien waivers are used as evidence that subcontractors are compensated for their work in a timely and complete fashion. If they're not being compensated, then they could potentially place a lien. The collection of these obviously reduces the risk of liens being placed on the property. They are collected on a monthly basis, and final lien waivers are collected at project completion before retainage is released. So it is happening throughout the course of a contract. I may have misspoken earlier. It is happening on a monthly basis. It's just not happening immediately upon those completion of those contract items.
Okay, I understand. Thank you.
Mr. Fisher, I think you had other questions. Did you want to ask them now?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, I did have other questions that I had forwarded to Director Patrick on Friday, but I think he's addressing those as we go along, so I appreciate that. Thank you.
Sure. Does anybody else have any other questions or comments on this report?
Madam Chair, this is Heather. I have one question.
Yeah, please.
Director Patrick, I was just wondering if you could clarify a little bit about when you, because it's in 2 different departments, the allowable markup on change order work. Is that essentially audit terminology for being, just not allowing the proper review? I wanted a little bit of clarification about what you mean allowable markup. When I think of markup, I automatically think, add a price to it. So, for admin, but I just want to I don't think that's what you mean. So I'd just like some clarification.
Sure. So markup is what's charged by contractors and subcontractors on change order work to account for overhead costs and profit margin. So it's typical to see a 10% charge for overhead and 5% for profit for a total of 15%. So the contract documents specifically don't outline what the allowable markup percentage is for change order work. That could be pre-agreed upon at the creation of the contract. During the review, there was no observation that change order price gouging was occurring, and there are other controls in place to prevent that. So the recommendation that existed here was specifically that those be documented up front, and also noted at the same time that the other controls that are in place to prevent price gouging, going beyond that 10 to 15% weren't occurring.
Thank you, that's helpful.
Yeah, thank you. This is a piece that comes up time after time in our normal setup in our Ways and Means Committee for increases, regular increases to so many projects we have going around the city, and specifically Council Vice President Jenkins is always scrutinizing these closely. So I'm appreciative of this audit and the work that you've done on this. Are there any, if there aren't any other questions or comments about this, could I have a motion to receive, file, and publish this audit document, please?
So moved, Madam Chair.
Second.
Second.
Thank you. Mr. Fisher has moved this item for both pieces, receive and file and to publish the document, and Ms. Johnston has seconded that motion. Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Committee Member Fletcher,
Aye.
Schrader,
Aye.
Fisher,
Aye.
Usich,
Aye.
Johnston.
Aye.
Chair Palmisano.
Aye.
There's 6 ayes.
That carries and that motion is approved. The next item for Mr. Patrick to share with us is the Race and Equity Impact Analysis Workpaper tool. I will note, just for anybody in the public that might be watching, that we do receive these reports ourselves. This works different than other committees, where committee members receive this information, and then only after it's presented and we scrutinize it with questions or comments, then it is published. So the published document is made public shortly after this meeting. But you do see all the slides and everything posted online in our regular meeting calendars on the website. Mr. Patrick.
Thank you, Chair Palmisano. So this Race and Equity Impact Analysis Workpaper is a special project that we put on the audit plan. If we can go to the first slide. So most departments, as they're conducting projects for the city, at this point are using race and equity impact analyses to assess those projects and making sure that they're meeting the city goal in aligning with race and equity goals. This is one of the highest priority goals that the city has undertaken, and those race and equity impact work papers are specific to other departments, make sense for their projects, but they don't necessarily fit well with the audit model. So specifically in this project, we wanted to work with the Division of Race and Equity to develop an audit specific race and equity impact analysis work paper. In doing so, I'd just like to thank that team. So Joy and Nick worked extensively with us on developing this project. And then specifically, I wanted to thank David Jones from the City of Seattle. He's the City of Seattle Audit Director, in sharing some of his knowledge and work on this. They've been using something similar in their audit planning phases, so he was able to provide some good help on this one. So this essentially is going to make sure that we collect the appropriate data and we incorporate this analysis into our work, a race and equity lens, as we're planning audits. We can go into the next slide. So again, it was developed with the Division of Race and Equity. And this document defines specific audit steps to make sure that we're taking race and equity impacts into consideration at each phase of the audit. So the first section that is in this, and the specific tool is attached to the agenda, I believe. It is a series of questions that is designed to assist our auditors in making sure that we're taking those issues into account. As we complete that section of the work paper, sometimes it's not going to apply. But even in audits where it doesn't necessarily look like there's going to be a race and equity impact based on what we're doing, it's good to go through the exercise of thinking outside of the box and making sure we're really addressing those needs. The first section, once we complete it, it may determine that we no longer need to use the race and equity impact work paper, in which case it'll be filed and approved. We'll have the appropriate sign-offs to make sure that that took place. When we do find in that first section that there is potential race and equity impact, we will continue that work paper all the way through completion to make sure that we're addressing all the relevant parts. So I'm happy to have this project completed. We're going to start incorporating into future audit work. I think it's really critical at this time that every department, as they're planning projects, take race and equity impacts into account when they're planning their projects, and I'm happy to start using this as a part of our audit committee materials. I think the next phase in this, in working with the Division of Race and Equity, is we'll have a training with their division and our staff on how to use this work paper, and then the auditors in charge of each project will begin using it. So I'm happy to answer any questions on this.
Thank you. There's I have seen departments just begin to use this, I'd say over the last month. It really is a lot more than a document that just gets filed and accompanies these things. I would share that I really do feel that it is challenging department leadership to look differently at everything that they undertake. And I think that that's an important advancement in our city. I'm not seeing any speakers that want to ask questions or comment in the queue, so I will ask Mr. Fisher, who had sent some questions about this on Friday. Mr. Fisher, did you want to ask the director more questions about this tool?
Yes, thank you, Chair Palmisano. I appreciate it. Yes, the questions I had, Director Patrick, had to do with how the audit function as such is going to be capable of gathering some of this information being requested. Specifically, there are 4 items in the document that audit is being asked to respond to, and that is, does the program have a clear impact on residents? Whether racially disaggregated data might be available, disproportionate impacts on certain communities, as well as whether input has been received about the issue for those who may be impacted. Those are things that seem to be particularly focused on what the program being audited could gather, but I'm not sure how the audit function itself would have access to that kind of information. I'm wondering if you could just elaborate a bit on that.
Absolutely. And Chair Palmisano, Committee Member Fisher, that's a great question. We'll be using this in the planning phase, and during that phase, we're in regular contact with the auditee. So we'll be working with them to answer those questions. And so the tool is designed to make sure that we're asking those questions up front. If we don't address those questions with the auditee and don't take those questions into consideration in the planning phase, it's unlikely that we're going to be able to analyze that information at the end of it. So specifically, some of these questions is the audit impact external facing programs. That I think we can answer relatively easily. I mean, if we're talking about an internal system, using a past example, the ABC systems, the procurement system post-implementation audit. So we were looking at how a new system internal to the city impacted the users. These are all internal city employees who are using it typically, so that's a little easier to understand. But if we're looking outwards, if we're looking at items on our future audit plan like affordable housing, that clearly has an impact on residents, but it's not always that simple. And so we'd have to work with the auditees themselves to answer that question. The question on racially disaggregated data is a question we can ask of the auditees, and also something we can consider ourselves. After the planning phase, when we're starting to request data from the specific department, we want to make sure that we're asking for items that would address any potential race and equity issues. So in that question, we're envisioning what data might be available, not necessarily whether it's available. We can always follow up with the auditee to get that information. The potential disproportionate impacts on communities of color or low income communities, that may take some work with the auditee, but also typically during that phase, we're doing a lot of benchmarking and background research. So what other audits have departments done around the country? What other information exists out in kind of the audit universe? That should allow us to consider possibly if there is evidence that it could have a disproportionate impact on communities of color or low income communities, that we take that into consideration during the audit. I don't think a lot of these questions are designed to get us thinking about the problem, but not necessarily answer whether an issue exists. I think if the primary idea is to make sure that we're taking that into consideration in planning and that we ask for the right data. And then the more concrete answers to those questions come in section 4 after we've actually requested data and analyzed it.
So just to be clear, Director Patrick, this document is not something to be filled out as a preliminary matter as you start an audit, but something to guide your audit through, so you're asking the right questions and gathering the correct data?
A portion of it would be filled out prior to beginning the actual field work. So it wouldn't occur before we put something on the audit plan or in just the initial stages of preparing for the audit. But once we get into the planning phase, where we're actually setting up what we're going to be testing and what we're going to be doing, the first section of the tool would be filled out to the extent that we can possibly fill it out. And then that would allow us to gather the appropriate data during the audit to make sure we can answer those questions later if they come up.
Okay, thank you very much.
I'm not seeing other questions or comments in the queue. I will go ahead and move this forward for receive and file and publication. Will somebody second this motion?
I'll second, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Fisher seconds the motion. Seeing no other questions, I'll ask the clerk to call the roll on item number 4.
Committee Member Fletcher?
Aye.
Schrader?
Aye.
Fisher?
Aye.
Usich?
Aye.
Johnston?
Aye.
Chair Palmisano?
Aye.
There are 6 ayes.
Thank you. That motion is adopted. Item number 5 is the COVID-19 impact on local government's internal audit department report. I'm very eager to see this report and have read a lot about how different local governments across the country have been handling COVID-19 and I guess and abroad. Mr. Patrick, bring us through this one.
Certainly. So this report is something that was in our phase 1. This was our phase 1 plan specifically to get our background knowledge up to speed on the rapidly developing environment related to COVID-19. I'm going to actually turn this over to my staff. Yuget specifically worked a lot on this project, and I think she's in a great place to be able to present the results and information. There's a lot of information contained within, and I will turn it over to her to present this.
Super. Ms. Esolat, it's nice to hear you.
Yeah, thank you, Ryan. Madam Chair, committee members, good morning, everyone. And as Ryan mentioned, I will now like to present a summary of our findings from the COVID-19 Impact on Audit Department Survey. And moving on to next slide, please. Okay, so just to provide some background information. So as part of our phase 1, as part of the phase 1 of our COVID-19 related audit work, we sent out a survey to audit departments across the country just to see how they're handling the pandemic and if they have any best practices that they could share. So we sent the survey to 46 audit departments exactly and received responses from about half of them. And why 46? Because our audit department has also been on weekly calls with other local government auditors across the country to discuss the impact of the pandemic on their work and share best practices. And as part of this work group, the City of Austin Audit Department conducted a survey on the impact of the pandemic on audit departments. So for our survey, we made sure to exclude those cities that had already responded to Austin's survey. So that's why we ended up with 46. And in addition, the Institute of Internal Auditors also conducted 4 polls to assess the impact of the pandemic on audit departments across all industries. Next slide, please. So the purpose of this survey really was to find out how local government audit departments across the country are dealing with the pandemic, how it's affecting their organization as a whole, and their audit departments more specifically, and what best practices they've been implementing to kind of handle the situation. Next slide, please. So on this slide, as you can see, the workforce size of the cities we surveyed varied from 1,000 to 10,000, and the audit department size varied from 2 to 37 FTEs. And the city of Minneapolis workforce size was similar to 4 other cities, and then of course, I think also you can see on this chart that our audit department with 4 FTEs is kind of ranking on the lower end of audit departments in terms of number of FTEs. So after this background information, I will now provide a summary of the results. And I would like to mention that our questions were broken down in 2 categories, like related to the organization as a whole, so the cities, and then specifically for the audit departments. So next slide, please. All right. So in response to the questions related to the organizations, 61% of the survey respondents indicated that remote work, for example, was not normal at their organization prior to COVID-19, while, as you can see on slide 6, if you can move to that one, 52% indicated that their organization is now planning to implement remote work going forward. And next slide. And this slide is now showing that 83% think that their future work environment will be a hybrid of office-based and remote work. Are there any questions so far before I keep going? Okay.
Not seeing any.
Okay, next slide. So in terms of business continuity and disaster recovery plans, about 26% of the respondents indicated that they had not considered a pandemic or a long recurring event in their plans. In contrast, as shown on the next slide, 50% are now revising their plans to include pandemics in the assumptions underlying business continuity and disaster recovery planning. So moving on to the next slide. This is now questions specifically related to audit departments. So as you can see in here, 52% of the respondents indicated that their audit plan changed as a result of the pandemic, while 26% are planning to make changes to their audit plans, and about 22% have no plan to make changes as of the date of this survey. Moving on to next slide. 57% of our respondents are planning to perform an organization-wide risk assessment to inform their audit plan, and 26% are not, and 70% are just not sure yet at this point if they will be doing another risk assessment based on the current risks in our industry. Next slide. And as I mentioned earlier, the IIA has also conducted multiple quick polls on the impact of the pandemic on the internal audit profession. And one area they covered is the impact on the budget of audit departments. And what they did is that they repeated some questions throughout the 4 polls that they conducted between March and June. And that provided some type of opportunity to see the continued impacts of the pandemic. For example, in the second survey that they conducted in April, 68% of internal audit shops in the public administration sector expected their budget to remain the same, while 21% expected it to decrease. However, by the 4th survey, which was in June, about half of the audit shops in the public administration sector now were expecting their budget to decrease over the next 12 months. So it was good to see the progress in the 4 surveys. Next slide, please. And as it relates to audit plans specifically, 49% of respondents expect a slight increase in the frequency of their audit plan update, while 12% expect a significant increase. And this is to audit plans to include or remove projects or based on the current risk environment. Next slide. So overall, some of the common themes that we noted in the survey responses included the normalization of remote work going forward and some risk assessment processes to identify high-risk areas in the current environment and kind of focus audit work on those areas. So some of the areas we noted were IT and cybersecurity. And with the implementation of remote work and the increased IT risk in a work-from-home environment, with the network not being as secure as in an office space, it's no surprise that the respondents identified IT and cybersecurity as one of the riskiest areas in the current environment. So, in fact, like 50% of them indicated that they updated the cybersecurity controls to reflect the current situation, while 5% indicated that their organization is planning to update the controls. And the next one was police and public safety. I think this has become high risk for other cities because of the unrest in Minneapolis and other cities resulting from the death of George Floyd. So the majority of the cities who responded to the survey indicated this, even though the survey was specifically related to COVID-19, they did indicate that police and public safety was now high risk for them as well. Human resources, and this is specifically due to staffing issues resulting from people getting potentially sick and furloughs, layoffs, budget freeze. So definitely human resources has become high risk because of that. And finance and payroll, this includes increased risk of fraud due to lack of monitoring of employees working remotely, for example, or some approval steps being now skipped in the procurement process just to expedite purchases, for example. If instead of a normal like 5 approvers for something, we're now requiring only 3, the risk of fraud here can increase. So I think finance and payroll made it to the top risk areas for this. And last but not least was health. So that's the risk of employees getting sick and having no backup plan to cover the areas, resulting in delay in work completion, for example. Any questions so far?
I'll pause here and ask Mr. Fisher. He had a question on, well, it's as a result of one of your very first slides, but Mr. Fisher?
I'm sorry, I might have asked this earlier, Madam Chair, but I'm not quick on the draw. So I thought I'd ask this question. I'm impressed that it appears that our audit department falls probably in the bottom third, maybe even lower, the bottom quarter of the type of personnel or the number of personnel used for audit purposes compared to the other, what I counted, 21 cities that responded. Some of those cities are actually smaller than our population in the city of Minneapolis. So I just have to ask this question. I think I ask a related question almost in every meeting. Do you feel that our audit department has the resources, financial and corresponding, needed to fulfill the mission to the city?
Thanks for that question, Madam Chair, Committee Member Fisher. I'd just like to mention that, as we noted, the average size of the audit departments were 8. And in the case of our audit department, we are a very, I would say, young and newer department. And now that we're gaining more trust and credibility from the city as a whole, we're definitely getting more requests for work. And what has been helpful for us has been being able to have our consultants with very specialized skills to work on projects that would normally take us more time. So for example, the construction contract was completed by experts in the industry. So having consultants has been very helpful, but definitely having more FTEs in our department will help us have audits with broader scope. So right now, the reason why we are able to produce so much is because we we have to narrow our scope, the scope of our projects, which we're still covering a good amount of work, but with more people, we can definitely cover a lot more. I hope this answers your question.
Well, I think it does answer the question. We're making do with what we can. I'm impressed that the department is doing well enough that we're gaining the confidence of the auditees. So certainly appreciate the work that you all have been doing on that, and call on our committee, of course, to help in that regard if we can build those relationships. One of the comments that I heard from Director Patrick last week is that we're getting pretty low, for instance, on our consultant budget, meaning that we're now halfway through the year, a little more than halfway through the year. Mm-hmm. Are we constrained? That was one of the things you had mentioned, is one of the things that we do perhaps a little bit better than other cities. We use more outside consultants, mm-hmm. But the budget goals, does that limit our capability to use those consultants to help in our staffing?
Thanks for the question, and Madam Chair, Committee Member Fisher. I would say definitely we will have to first base our work on the riskiest areas right now, and also anything that is involving like or requiring a specialized skill. We might not be able to get to those projects right now. We'll have to postpone them because of the current situation, but definitely as a team of 4, we will be able to continue to focus our work on some of the riskiest areas for now, and do what we can do with the current budget situation. But definitely having consultants will help get to some of the specialized areas work we need to get done as soon as possible, especially IT and cybersecurity, for example, which is one of the highest risk areas.
Thank you, Ms. Hess.
Yep, no problem.
Thank you. Ms. Johnston, did you have a question or comment?
I guess my comment was looking at the size of the cities. I think we are relatively comparable in terms of staffing, but I think I appreciate that the speaker's comments on using consultants to supplement. I think that that's really a prudent approach because we would need to supplement based on either skills like something technical like a security audit versus, or just kind of based on workload. Looking up some of the other cities and how large they are, and I think we are relatively comparable in terms of full-time staff.
Yeah, that's a good comment. If for those that maybe didn't hear, I think Ms. Johnson, you said a lot of these comparable size cities have comparable sized audit departments. Ms. Esolat, did you want to comment on that in any regard?
I'm sorry, Madam Chair. I apparently moved my microphone away from my face, so sorry about that.
Now we can hear you really well.
Sorry about that. This is what I get for getting a new computer. I have to dial in the first time. So my only comment on that was that, you know, because we do seem pretty comparable in terms of full-time staff based on a quick population check, but I just appreciated the speaker's comment on supplementing with consulting. I think that's really a smart way and a very efficient way to go about conducting the work of the audit committee, either whether it's consultants based on skill or expertise, or really just the ebbs and flows of the workload. So I just wanted to acknowledge that comment, and this was a really interesting information, so thank you.
Yeah, thank you, of course. All right, any other question? This one?
Not seeing any.
Okay, so our department will keep working with our peers across the nation and all city departments to gather any relevant information that will inform our audit plan. And I think it's worthwhile mentioning that in this phase, the next phase of this process is a survey of city departments that we actually sent out. We started getting responses, and that will also help us identify risk specific to our departments, and also okay. Any other question at this point?
Not right now.
Okay. All right. Thank you. I think I'll turn it back to Ryan for.
Oh, this is the end of the presentation. Yeah. I will ask my colleagues again, any thoughts or questions that come up for you. One that comes up for me is about how that more remote work environment changes the risk environment, right? You mentioned IT security, but are there other, I don't know how free-form the survey was, but was there other kinds of feedback that you have heard, whether internally or from these other surveyed cities, about how to set that up well, or what we should be particularly concerned about?
Madam Chair, I can comment on that. I think remote work in general for audits for the profession, given that most auditors tend to travel a lot for work, I think the transition was easier for people in this industry than other industries. So I don't think, like, from whether it's from the survey or all the webinars we've been participating in, like the transition hasn't been like difficult for more people. I think the only issue that they noted was the face-to-face time with the auditees that we are missing, because in our profession this is very important. But for walkthroughs and everything that we do for our audits, is better to meet with people in person. I think that's the side that is causing people some issues. Other than that, the transition has been good for most of them.
Madam Chair, if I may, one last question.
Please.
Ms. Escalante, I see that disaster recovery and business continuity are covered in the survey. Were there any specific questions? I didn't see any, but were there specific questions concerning enterprise risk management work being done by these various cities?
Madam Chair, Committee Member Fisher, I think there are a lot other surveys going on right now that we are participating in, like just the city of Austin did a survey, and right now I think other cities are doing the survey, and they're more specifically related to enterprise risk management as well. And also our work with the city departments, which is another survey that we're doing, will help kind of get the answers related to that area.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yep.
Director Patrick, did you want to say something related to that?
Yeah, just to follow up on that, we are working again with the city of Austin and other local government auditors, like you get mentioned. There is another survey out now using kind of the same methodology that specifically addresses enterprise risk management. So it is exclusively about that. And kind of one of the nice things about auditors and this work group is we're all sharing information continuously. So we'll be able to take their results, as well as there is one other large study going on right now out of Washington. We're all sharing information, and that way none of us has to do all of it. So we can incorporate those results as they come back, and there are a significant number of results coming back on that survey. We'll be incorporating that into our phase 2 work with departments.
Thank you. One thing, Ms. Essolat, surely COVID and a switch to work from home presents its challenges, but in particular, something that's been talked about, like on public radio, and that have been the difficulty in onboarding new people. new people to the workforce and new people to a specific workforce, like in this case, our own city. Have you heard any, I guess, creative solutions or best practices that are starting to emerge at how you bring somebody on as a new employee in this heavily distributed environment?
Madam Chair, I have not specifically. Maybe Ryan in the work group, you've heard something that you can share?
Absolutely. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that has come up in work groups, it's been kind of an interesting mix because most places are on a hiring freeze right now and are starting to feel the budgetary impact. So onboarding has gone down. The solution that local government auditors seem to be implementing right now is making sure that a lot of that informal knowledge, that training that would happen on a kind of a peer-to-peer basis when people are in office, is starting to get documented. We're realizing that knowledge transfer, the paradigm has shifted as everyone is moving to remote work. And I think as you saw in the survey, many, if not most departments are considering this to be a long-term, if not permanent shift to a lot of telework that's going to be impacted. And we've got to figure out and work with departments to make sure that all of that informal knowledge transfer that would happen is documented to the degree that's possible, and that departments are now adjusting their policies and their process documents to reflect the fact that people are working remotely. It's going to take a lot of work across the country for local governments specifically to do that. I think we've benefited a lot from being all together in the same environment and those offices being shared, but now we're going to have to move into phase 2 where we're working with departments specifically on documenting some of those informal things that wouldn't have been documented in the past.
Thank you. Anybody else with questions or comments? I'm not seeing any. I'll go ahead and move this motion. Ms. Johnston mentions in the conversation tab that this is a good report. Thank you. And I really appreciate your staying in touch with your peers across the country as we manage our way through this and want to be on the leading edge of this and also a resource for others as we work through it together. I believe this is just a receive and file, so I'll go ahead and move that. Could I have a second to receive and file this report?
Second.
Thank you, Commissioner Musich, seconds it. I will ask the clerk to call the roll.
Committee Member Fletcher.
Aye.
Schrader.
Aye.
Fisher.
Aye.
Musich.
Aye.
Johnston.
Aye.
Chair Palmisano.
Aye.
There are 6 ayes.
That carries and that motion is approved. Last but not least, we'll transition to our report of our internal auditor. We'll receive an update from Interim Director Patrick about, work in progress and other things going on in the audit department. Mr. Patrick.
Thank you, Chair Palmisano. So the auditor update will cover kind of the broader aspects of what the department's doing, but also drill down into continuous monitoring and audit issue follow-up. So this is a broader presentation, but contains a lot of information, and we have a couple of guest speakers who will be joining us throughout it. So can we go to the next slide? So I'll cover ongoing work, the body-worn camera audit process that's in here because I don't have the final document to publish, but I'll touch on that then. Our open audit issues and continuous monitoring. Go to the next slide. Just to note what we have completed, what is in progress, and what special projects and consultations are occurring. So first, we've completed the construction contract amendments phase 2. You heard that today. Work on the Park Board grant management audit is in progress. So we've received documentation and we are underway on that work and hope to report that audit back to you soon. Next slide. Our special projects, the criteria, key performance indicators, and best practices research, that is what you just heard. So via local government auditors work group, we've received our feedback on what's going on. And as you can hear, there is a ton of research going on around the country, specifically on how audit can assist in pandemics. We've attended hours of webinars really are trying to build our knowledge base before we go to departments and offer our help to make sure that we're giving them the highest quality service. Our City of Minneapolis specific survey is in progress. We've sent it out to departments, and we're working with those departments on the ongoing risk assessment that we're doing because of the changing environment. We received 9 responses, so about half of the city. I'd like to specifically thank Trish Glover. She responded almost immediately to the survey, and we're working with the remaining departments on their responses. So this is the phase 2 portion of our COVID 3-phase project. Once we have those responses and we kind of see what departments need, then we'll be kind of targeting and drilling in on those specific issues that we can help with. Our consultations, our body worn camera audit process, this is completed. And I'm gonna go into a little bit more detail on that in the next section. Our race and equity workpaper design is completed. We'll have training again. You heard me discuss that in the first portion of the presentation. And we do have new work. So we were asked, specifically Audit was asked to lead the RFP process and monitoring, to be the contract manager for the after action review of the city's response to the civil unrest in the summer of 2020. So this is a big project. We're not going to be conducting the work, but we will be leading the so the request for proposals and selection of the contractor. I'll be chairing the work group and monitoring the contract progress on this. This is a very critical thing for the city to do right now, is to look back at what happened during the civil unrest and our response. So we formed our initial small work group. The RFP is nearly complete. We'll go through all the steps to get that underway. And then, because we are not a subject of that specific project, we're in a neutral position. We'll be there to chair the project as it goes along and make sure that the contractors are receiving what they need and doing that work. So it's a new project in place, but a very critical one.
I didn't realize that you would be chairing it, so thank you for that effort. That this will take up a lot of time, I want to acknowledge.
It is absolutely necessary. It'll be challenging. Thankfully, the participants are eager to have that project underway, and it's a very collaborative effort to design the RFP, to evaluate contractors. We'll be pulling in a pretty diverse group of people to make sure we're getting the highest quality analysts to work on that project, and that project is completed in a timely manner.
Mm-hmm. I would say there's a huge amount of interest in this from the community, and I'm glad that it's getting underway.
And it is well underway. Everybody is very motivated to complete this. So next, I'll talk about the body-worn camera audit program consultation. Like I said, our work is complete on this, but I don't have the final draft to show the committee. That will come at the next meeting. So this was specifically to assisting the Civil Rights Department, City Attorney in developing an audit process to comply with the Minnesota Department of Human Rights TRO. It's detailing how civilian analysts within the Office of Police Conduct Review are proactively and strategically auditing BWC footage, body-worn camera footage, to file or amend complaints on behalf of the Department of Civil Rights. This is beyond just their normal investigation process. This process is intended to address systemic issues related to racism and discrimination, just broader issues within the police department. You've seen some of this work come before the city before. The Police Conduct Oversight Commission and analysts in the Office of Police Conduct Review have picked up on trends and videos that have launched projects that led to significant changes. This is a change to build a specific program designed to do just that, rather than having it be on a piecemeal or almost, haphazard basis where viewing footage leads to recognition of a systemic issue. This is going to be a more targeted review of that. Can we go to the next slide? So audit participation in this consultation completed in August, so this month. And it was really critical that audit be a participant in this project because they're talking about designing an audit-like program. We used our knowledge and our skill set to help them establish an appropriate mechanism for an annual discrimination-focused police risk assessment a rolling plan development cycle, how to scope projects and report back on those projects, and referring cases to appropriate agencies. So we have built a mini audit process very focused on this specific issue, as the Minnesota Department of Human Rights demanded in the temporary restraining order to be housed in civil rights. This is going to be an interesting one. It's pretty novel around the country and not a whole lot to draw on to develop it. So it was, again, good that Audit was able to participate and, along with city attorney, civil rights, and other staff, really design something concrete that could have a large impact. So the final document needs to be approved by the Minnesota Department of Human Rights and the other various bodies to comply with the temporary restraining order. Once those approvals are done, I will come back with the actual policy document, the procedures, and share that full documentation with the audit committee. But for the purposes of our work, we are done with that, and we can move on to our next project slated to be completed related to police, and that would be the field training officer program. We're already meeting with staff in charge of that, professional standards and training. That project is now underway, with more information to come at the next audit committee meeting. Any questions related to that?
Mr. Patrick, I guess it's interesting to hear that the process to do this ongoing assessment of body-worn cameras for patterns and behaviors will reside within the Department of Civil Rights. Something that just off the bat seemed challenging about it was that it seemed like a very resource-intensive endeavor. Can you comment at all about how a function like this would be resourced?
I don't know
what the plan is for.
I don't know the specific plan to resource it. I can talk, I mean, as just someone who has past experience with this. I did work reviewing body-worn camera footage. I assisted in all the body camera audits that internal audit did, and along with projects in the Civil Rights Department that were heavy in body camera footage review. It is very time consuming. There's no way to view a body camera recording except for at real time. I mean, you watch an entire video and there can be multiple videos depending on the situation that you're viewing. So it is resource intensive. Right. I think the thing that audit was helpful with, and the department was creative with both city attorney and the Civil Rights Department, is understanding how to develop a project with a reasonable scope and timeline. That was pretty critical in this project, was not to just take a scattershot approach of randomly picking body-worn cameras and seeing what you can find. The good add to this was developing a pretty comprehensive risk assessment process, and then defining a narrow and targeted scope for the review to limit the amount of information that's being taken in that directly addresses the risk areas identified in the initial portion of the kind of annual or rolling risk assessment that they're doing, and then accurately sampling the population for appropriate videos. So using that audit methodology, the way that we do work and the way that in general kind of social science research occurs, being able to really narrow it down and do it scientifically will alleviate some of the resource constraints related to that. It doesn't take them away. Obviously, those projects are very time consuming and challenging. So I don't know specifically how it's going to be resourced, but the staff in the Office of Police Conduct Review are professionals when it comes to watching and reviewing body-worn camera videos for issues. So,
Thank you. Any other questions or comments about that body of work? I'm not seeing any. Go ahead.
Okay, so I have staff, specifically Travis Kamm is our open audit issues follow-up expert. He's been working on these projects, and I'd like to turn it over to him to talk about open audit issues and follow-up in progress. Travis is available.
Welcome, Mr. Kamm.
All right, perfect. Thank you. Members of the committee, Madam Chair, this is kind of a regular update on open audit issues, kind of where we've been at the past couple of months and where we will go. If you go to the next slide, you will see here are audit issue statistics, a kind of regular slide. So we have open and extended audit issues. You will see that there's a lot of increase now in overdue audit issues. Those are all related to generally the ones impacted by COVID or departmental functions. And as we're working with management to get a read on kind of the new timeline, what kind of resources, we will kind of update the timelines as well and make sure that they're being remediated effectively. But right now, we kind of been categorizing working department function by department and issue by issue where we can. There is an update in progress, and that relates to the AEG audit issue with finance that we are working on trying to remediate, as well as you will see that there's been 5 audit issues closed since the last committee. Those relate to the construction contract audit issues. And then I will say that these do not include 2 of the post-procurement ABC audit that was presented last time. They will be updated next time in here. And if you go to the next slide, you will see, again, just kind of where we're at with COVID, working with particularly finance, IT, and police on some of these ones that are more of the overdue or open audit issues. And at the end of these slides, we'll have kind of the regular open and overdue or the listing of the audit issues as well in a couple slides here. And then on the next slide, you will see, so we have the 5 audit issues closed, and we have been able to close parts of the audit issues, specific thanks to, in the contract amendments review, we worked with the NCR team and development finance teams to close a policy and procedure issue related around the NRP contracts. So just like to recognize Bob Cooper and his team for getting it effectively or remediated pretty much 6 months in advance of our timeline, and taking making sure that they're working with us and making sure that they are able to get it effectively controlled. And then the next slide, you will see our regular non-public audit issues. So we still have 2 non-public audit reports that have issues, PeopleSoft Border Security and then Police Information Security IT audit. And those are system security issues related to IT that we've been communicating with IT, and hopefully by October we'll be able to present a more updated timeline for a lot of these audit issues related to these functions as we agreed a new timeline and a new way, or the best way to remediate the audit issues over time. And then on the next slide, we will have the next 2 slides are just kind of a general open audit and overdue audit issues. So you can see the issue rating and the issue due date related to most of the generally audit issues are moderate, low audit issues are marked as closed. And then the overdue ones we will populate with either close them out or be able to have a new timeline with a new better idea of how they're going to be effectively remediated. So this slide, and as well as the next slide, these are the kind of ones, as well as the recent contract amendments review, phase 2 construction contracts with a to be determined timeline. And then if there's no any questions for this, I will turn it over to Carmen Holiday for the continuous monitoring update.
I'm not seeing any questions or comments, but I will pause because we have some people dialed in. Are there any questions or comments on that part of the update from Mr. Com? I'm not seeing any. Oh,
Madam,
ahead, Mr. Fisher.
Mr. Com, could you remind me what validation means? Some of these audits are under validation.
Yes, certainly. So, Committee Member Fisher, Madam Chair. So issue validation are ones where we do have support for the audit, or we've been working, management has submitted support for the audit issue, and we're working on trying to remediate it. Some of them are currently in that state as the original state or the original issue kind of recognizing the audit might have changed. So for example, there's ones related to CPED and the loan program. They will be getting a new loan program software program and then in the near future here. So we haven't been quite able to close them out in terms of the original. We're still working with, we'll be working with them in new projects to adjust them, or finding a way that the original audit issue has been remediated. Some of them are quite old in terms of 3 to 4 years back, related to before the current team was here, or kind of related to the way systems have changed. So they're currently ones that we are not quite comfortable yet with closing out, but we're still in contact with them and we'll be addressing in either future work or as we finish remediating them.
I see. Thank you very much. Chair Palmisano, one more question, if I may. I do see on this, on the work plan that you've developed here, that the police off-duty work is overdue for obvious reasons.
Mm-hmm.
It isn't lost on me, though, that now we have a Star Tribune article as of last Thursday, noting that we have kind of put this on the back burner, so to speak, while pointing out at the same time that this is a time when police are really not doing much off-duty work, and that maybe it's a more opportune time to look at that more closely if we have the resources to do that. I'm just wondering if any member of the committee or Mr. Com, you could comment on that thought.
Yep, certainly. Or Madam Chair, Committee Member Fisher. So yeah, with off-duty, the original audit issues had timelines pretty much due from March to currently, and then we have been in contact with, as is kind of with the recent changes to COVID as well. We are aware and having updates from the off-duty work group that has been meeting, and I think some of the policy changes as well are kind of going to stem from that off-duty work group, which is kind of the off-duty work, and as well as kind of the circumstances of changes. So the first 3 audit issues specifically to policy and procedure are kind of more of the system, and then the 4th audit issue was GPS capability as well, and some on squad cars, and that was a COVID impacted budget item related that we received from the police. But in terms of that, I think as the off-duty work group meets, which we're not a part of, we just kind of get updates from them and making sure that we're tracking as the audit or the issue status, and trying to, as that work group meets and kind of works through COVID, we anticipate being able to either close them out or kind of develop new timelines in terms of how will that work, or kind of the direction the city is going to take with off-duty may have shifted over the past 6 months to the past year when the audit report was reported on.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I was distracted with another fairly urgent email that had just come in. Mr. Fisher, I'm not sure I heard the extent of your question, but I'm happy to comment on any questions about the current off-duty work group with the mayor's office. Councilmember Fletcher and I both serve on that work group. And as you might imagine, this audit report coming out shortly before COVID hit, and then a pandemic situation where so many places that off-duty was regularly used immediately shut down, and the people that were involved in those in that off-duty work and in those relationships were scrambling. Owners of businesses and other places were scrambling to try and survive, and immediately, you know, all of the off-duty work, nearly all the off-duty work just went away or transformed into more about like security of empty buildings kinds of work. So we're trying to navigate through that and just know that we want to go back to something different. We want to have recommendations and implement something as the pandemic decreases and we start to open up more. But I'm happy to also answer any questions about that.
Madam Chair, I think that really answered my question. I was wondering, the question I actually asked was, is this an good time, since off-duty work, it really has kind of dried up? Would this be a good time to really start looking at that more vigorously? And I understand now the workforce is working on policy direction in that regard, given the COVID restrictions we're under. So I do appreciate your response.
That's right. And while we couldn't, while it didn't make sense to pull the police leadership to meet about this more longer term topic during the immediate and urgent needs around civil unrest in our city, and we have gotten back together since that time a couple of times, as recently as early last week, I think, or maybe it was 2 weeks ago at this point.
Great, thank you.
Go ahead, Mr. Com, or actually, are you going to turn it over to Mr. Alade?
Yep, yeah, if there's no further questions, Madam Chair, then Common Holiday will be introducing continuous monitoring.
Thank you. I'm not seeing any other questions or comments on the previous report, so go ahead, Mr. Alide.
Madam Chair, committee members, I would like to provide updates on 5 departments and divisions on continuous monitoring. It's an internal control, data governance, a neighborhood and community relationship, Minneapolis Park and Recreation Board, and Minneapolis Police Department. I'll start with the internal control. The division has made some change to their control testing plan for 2020. They add a new session to evaluate 2019 deficiency. And they also revised the testing format for accounts payable, account receivable, and payroll. Madam Chair, or the committee member, I would like to introduce Chris Filippaldi, Internal Control and Financial Risk Assessment Manager, for more detail on their work. So I will turn to Chris.
Sure.
Good morning, Madam Chair and everyone on the call, and thank you, Tomlin. My name is Chris Fittipaldi. I am implementing and installed the internal controls program for the FPS area specifically, and we have been enjoying our 3rd year of doing those controls. And the highlights of what's going on in the internal control area was, if you looked at the audit findings from 2017 and 2018, there was an internal control finding at that weakness. And as a result of the 2019 audit, that has been remedied. So that's the good news. Continuing forward for the 2020 internal controls program, it's going to follow the 2019 program with 2 additional modifications. First, we will be working with all of the business units within FPS to document exactly how their identified weaknesses as a result of the internal control program, and how they're going to be implementing those strengthening measures for 2020. Next, and importantly, all the business units will be working on the documentation for their COVID response efforts and how it's impacting the FPS business units individually. So that will be in addition to the internal control report that we provide on SharePoint. Similar to last year, there'll just be more categories for those additional 2 efforts. I know I tend to get into the weeds because internal control is my passion. So I don't want to do that, but if anyone has any specific questions, I'm happy to answer those at this time.
Thank you, Mr. Fittipaldi. Are there any questions for him at this time? I'm not seeing any.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
Yeah, we'll move to the data governance. The consultation is still pending. and we will inform the committee as soon as the work is done. Move to the neighborhood and community relationship. They have created the guidelines, new guidelines that include measures of accountability of neighborhood organization. Initially, the guideline to be submitted to City Council approval in August, but they moved that to October due to the extension period for public input. Next slide, please. Minneapolis Park and Recreation Board. The Minneapolis Park Board and Recreation Board risk assessment team has modified their process in response to COVID-19. They are also working on mitigating emerging risks associated to recent events in their area in timely manner. So they'll be working on those remediation. Next slide, please. Okay, this one will be Minneapolis Police Department Sexual Assault Examination Kit. The MPD has responded to OD observation and recommendation in sexual assault examination kit consultation that was presented to your committee in the beginning of February this year. So for taking the first observation 1, policy and procedure around the handling of sexual assault examination kit need enhancements. So the MPD has drafted the writing policy and procedure to ensure proper and consistent handling of sexual assault examination kit. The next step in the process will be the management approval of the policy and procedure. Next slide, please. Next, observation 2. Okay, there, the observation 2, there's no centralized number to contact MPD regarding newly collected sexual assault examination kit or formal tracking of the 10 days notification requirement by Minnesota statutes. So the MPD has provided a single phone number or email to hospital, and 1 full-time police support technician is assigned to coordinate the collection and submission of sexual assault examination kit. Madam Chair, OD committee member, I will turn now to my colleague Travis to provide more the update on the observation 3 and 4. Thank you.
Thank you. Wait, back to observation 2 though, Kamlin.
Yep.
This is a significant departure. This is a significant improvement from where we were before, to have 1 specific person always assigned and tracking everything instead of having people reaching out to specific precincts or any other phone number they might have about having an SAE kit. While this is not the statewide solution that we are hoping for through the legislature and future policy work, this does seem to really take care of some of the barriers and failure points or potential risk points in how we deal with new sexual assault kits. Is that, would you agree?
Yeah, I agree with that. That was easy to implement this and to coordinate everything, and that would be to make that easy for hospital and assigning a person to go and collect those kits and managing that make their way more easier to collect the kit instead of the kit sitting at the hospital. They don't know who is going to get it, what time to get it. So that fixes those kind of problems.
Mm-hmm. Okay, are there any other, I'm not seeing anybody else in queue. Go ahead, I think you were going to turn it over to somebody else for the
I'm
next.
turning over to my colleague, Travis Khan.
Mr. Khan.
Madam Chair, committee members, just kind of add on that as well. Lieutenant Horn and MPD has kind of done a lot of work over the past couple of months, especially during the pandemic and COVID, especially facilitating that centralization and working with hospitals and making sure that everyone is kind of on board with this new system and new approach, and that they're able to more effectively manage and track while they kind of await that statewide or kind of centralization. For observation 3 and 4, so observation 3 kind of related to the backlog inventory spreadsheet and kind of the way that they're methodically going about working through the kits, kind of researching, prioritizing. They continue to use a tiered approach on prioritization, and they also have a primary investigator now assigned to it who's responsible for reviewing and investigating the cases. And if you go to the next slide, as well as their it's really done on a victim-centered approach, considering a variety of factors, and they do have management and kind of upper level review by the team to make sure that they're going through and properly prioritizing and tracking, as well as adding fields and information to their spreadsheet as they go about this work. And they did also add and include all the missing kits and other kits that they identified throughout the process. And then on the next slide.
Mr. Khan, I'm going to pause you there just for a question from Mr. Fisher.
Thank you, Chair Palmisano. Mr. Khan, on observation 3, you listed that the MPD will use a tiered approach prioritizing SSE kits. Could you elaborate a bit on that? How do they determine prioritization of SAE kits?
Yep. Madam Chair, Commitment with Fisher. I believe based on the original conversations, it was kind of done on way to when the kits related to kind of whether or not they're restricted or not, as some of the kits first in the initial stages weren't to be set up for testing. But then after that, it kind of sent it down to, I think based on the research, as they research farther individual the cases, we can get back to the committee. I can reach out to MPD and kind of their initial process as they go about it, as I'm not aware of the exact metrics or specifics, but I do know it kind of based on as it took, based on throughout the process and throughout their initial things. But that is something we can follow up on, and if you're looking for more specifics on that tiered approach.
Thank you, Mr. Cobb. Chair Palmisano, I would think that there would be significant data points that audit might be interested in, or the committee might be interested to determine how prioritization of SAE kits for submission are made. That seems to be the very issue that has led to the concern over SAE kits, is how those determinations are made and by whom.
I agree, but Mr. Khan, is that a question more for MPD, or is that a question you feel prepared to answer? Actually, I'm going to ask Mr. Patrick to chime in here first, if that's all right. Mr. Patrick?
Yeah, and I just want to note that this is specifically for testing the backlog. I think the goal in the future is to not develop a backlog, and a tiered approach wouldn't necessarily be necessary in the future because they will be testing all the kits. So as they go about testing the backlog using the tiered approach that addresses evidence and solvability, as well as a variety of other things in the future, ideally we won't need a tiered approach because all kits are going to be tested that meet the qualifications for testing.
That makes sense. Mr. Fisher?
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. I still think that if we could get additional information concerning what approach is being taken to determine prioritization on the existing backlog, I think that would be an important part of the audit process.
We can certainly request one of the members of the team that's working on this, because it is a group involving a variety of backgrounds. It's a diverse group of people working through this list. But for the next audit committee meeting, we can absolutely have requests out for one of them to come and present information related to that.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments on this part? If not, I'll ask Mr. Com to go ahead.
Thank you. And then on observation 4 related to communication and execution of the backlog testing plan. In the creation of the policy and procedures, it did further define roles and responsibilities and kind of further make sure that they're designating positions, not necessarily a person to lead it. And then there's also a multidisciplinary team that's MPD, Hennepin County Attorney's Office, and the Sexual Violence Center. They do have regular meetings with BCA to discuss kit collection and testing and to communicate on ongoing development and future needs. So in the previous audit finding, there was kind of some confusion, and as well as making sure that now there's regular communication and a regular outlet for this group and team to make sure that they're testing within the backlog as they go about. And I think our last update we got from them was about 150 kits of the backlog they have been able to get back and working through. And I think in the future they do related to this as well as regular updates like this to audit committee and to as we continue to follow up with the team to make sure that they're have what they need and they're on track to get this backlog in, further ensure that the backlog is tested down and that it doesn't exist anymore. And that is all we have on this. If there's any further questions related to these kits, if not, I'll turn it back over to Ryan Patrick to close out the presentation.
Thank you. On that last point, Mr. Com, thank you for explaining what the interdisciplinary team meant. Is audit part of that team with the biweekly meetings, or you're just monitoring this regularity and progress?
Yeah, Madam Chair, good question. We are not a part of this regular meetings. We're just part of the, as a role of independence, we're just kind of following updates from them and receiving updates from the stakeholders as we go about it. But we are not a part of the disciplinary team that is actively involved in more of the cases and more of the individual testing of each individual kit, where we're audit's role is kind of more following up on the process and the results at the end.
I especially appreciate the collaboration in this case with the Hennepin County Attorney's Office and also with our community partners. You know, they're the ones that are translating this effort to the victims themselves and working with the victims and what their wishes are in moving forward with these kids or not. So thank you for that update. Ms. Johnston.
Madam Chair, thank you. I was just wondering if I'm not remembering what the goal was in terms of timeline for completing the testing backlog, when that is going to occur, or when we hope it's going to occur.
Yeah, that's a good question. Mr. Com or Mr. Patrick, do you have a sense of that?
Madam Chair, Camille Johnston, good question. I think we do not have a current timeline with them on that. I think it was dependent on a number of staffing and other factors. When we first kind of began discussions with them when we first did the audit report earlier this year, some of that depending on the funding with the analysts at the BCA and that timeline to get them up to speed. But in our last update, we do know that they have been able to get staffing and they are applying for grants. But we will continue to follow up and kind of probably narrow down a more specific timeline depending on a number of factors as I go about a more normal process. But at least when we first did the initial report and in our current conversations, I think it's too early or as I go about it, we're not a definite timeline yet, but as soon as possible is the goal, such as applying for the grants and expediting the funding on the analysts at the BCA to get that down. So.
Thank you. Is it reasonable to think that at the next audit meeting, we might end up with a timeline on such an endeavor, or is that unrealistic?
Committee member Chair Palmisano, that's something we can certainly follow up on and provide with our stakeholders and see if we can get more of an update by next audit committee, certainly. So,
or at least a tracking to completion.
Yeah.
Ms. Johnston, did you have anything further?
Nope. Thank you for your question. That you were reading my mind already. Thanks.
There we go. Mr. Com, does that complete your report?
Yep, yeah, that completes the report, and then I'll turn it back over to Ryan Patrick to close it out. So,
thank you, Mr. Patrick.
Thank you, Chair Palmisano. Last but not least, there was a natural segue for this earlier as we discussed enterprise risk management to introduce one more person to provide an introduction to the audit committee, someone who's definitely going to be a relevant partner as audit moves forward. And we've been meeting regularly to discuss new work, and that's Emily Colby, the new enterprise risk management personnel for the city. Emily is on the call, and I was hoping that she could provide just an introduction to the audit committee so you're familiar with her background, and the work that she's going to be doing.
Yes, I'm so sorry. I was supposed to pause after the continuous monitoring section
perfect.
to allow for that introduction. Emily, welcome. Did you want to say a few words?
Madam Chair, committee members, thank you for having me attend this morning. I look forward to working with everyone. As Ryan has stated, we've had some preliminary meetings together to sort of talk about how risk and audit can work together and partner, and I really look forward to that relationship. I will give you just a little bit of my background because maybe that can be helpful. I most recently was the enterprise risk manager for Ramsey County. I was hired there in 2017 to design and implement an enterprise risk management program. Prior to that, I was the global director of risk management at a not-for-profit trade association that did business in about 70 countries worldwide, and there I oversaw their enterprise risk program, the insurance program, and compliance for their core business areas. Prior to that, I was doing, test security work for ACT. I've done some political work. So I've worked both in the public and private sector, and I think I have a pretty good view of both. I don't want to go on too long, but I thought I'd just give you a little bit of that flavor. And then if you have any questions for me.
Thank you, Ms. Colby. We are certainly lucky to have you here at the city. And we appreciate your expertise and what you are bringing to this role. I'm not seeing any questions from committee members. Mr. Patrick, did you want to add anything?
Just to close out the presentation, this is the information that Audit had to present to the committee. Thank you all so much for your attention. You can see in front of you the remaining 2020 audit plan as we've completed projects. It's still an ambitious 2020 audit plan, and certainly some of the projects will stretch into next year. But we'll be moving on to phase 2 of the COVID project. We've already started up the field training officer program. Like Kamlan mentioned, our data governance audit is going to circle back and cover some of those audit findings that weren't closed out in 2015, but need to be addressed. And we'll continue to do our work. So that's the information we had for today. I'll take any general questions now and then just close out the presentation afterwards.
Thank you. Mr. Fisher.
Thank you, Chair Palmisano. Mr. Patrick, could you report a little bit on the phase 1 and phase 2 COVID response that we were implementing? I'm particularly interested in response to the mayor's request for work on finding some cost savings measures for response to the COVID situation.
There are, as we look at the budget shortfalls for 2020 and potentially 2021 budget impacts, where the city is currently in the 2021 budgeting phase. Specifically, the mayor's proposed budget will be coming out later this year. When we have more information about what that potential budget is going to look like, it'll be easier for us to work with departments to thoughtfully implement any budget reductions that come up. The phase one for us was really to look primarily at some of those, what we were seeing across the country and what best practices showed us, what information we could use to support future budget impacts. And now that we have that good background, we're starting to see where the high risk areas are. Can make sure that budget cuts don't impact areas and create new significant risks to the city. So I think phase one for us, because the situation was so novel for audit departments around the country, that was really our opportunity to do a broad background survey and develop our knowledge base so that as we move into budgetary impacts, we're doing it in a thoughtful way. Audit is contributing in a thoughtful way. Obviously, we're not the ones making budget decisions, but we can certainly help departments as they deal with future budget impacts. You'll see more of that in phase two as we've reached out to departments and we're working with them on their specific needs related to ongoing budget impacts.
Okay, thank you very much.
Certainly. So again, that was the information we have to present to you today. Our work is moving along at a good clip. Like Travis mentioned, we have had to extend out some open audit issues due to COVID impacts, but we have received responses from departments. So it's not that nothing has happened on those during this time period. We have received a lot of input and work. We're in the process of validating those so we can close them out, developing new timelines that are reasonable and work with departments' needs. So I suspect we'll have a larger open audit issue update at the next audit committee meeting. I've been tracking the comments throughout this meeting, and I'll make sure that we have the relevant presenters to cover any remaining questions on those at the next meeting. But again, thank you to my staff. They worked very hard on this audit update. They've been working very hard on these various projects. And thank you to the committee for your attention and thoughtful questions. Anything remaining, I'm happy to take now or offline. And again, thank you for your attention.
Thank you. I'll echo what Ms. Johnson just put in our chat for people watching online. Thanks for your work, Director Patrick, and to the entire audit team. It's certainly thorough work, and I don't want you to mistake our lack of questions for interest in it. You've done a very thorough job in many ways here. I will go ahead and move that we receive and file the report of internal auditor. Could I have a second?
Second.
Mr. Fisher seconds the motion. I'll ask the clerk to call the roll on item number 6, which is the report of the internal auditor.
Committee member Fletcher.
Aye.
Schrader.
Aye.
Fisher.
Aye.
Musich.
Aye.
Johnston.
Aye.
Chair Palmisano.
Aye.
There are 6 ayes.
That carries and that motion is approved. Last, we have announcements. Are there any announcements for today? I'm not seeing any. Seeing no further business before us, with no objection, I will declare this meeting adjourned. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you, Madam